With the re-release of the West German forces for Flames of War World War III, I thought that I would take this opportunity to show you how to paint the NATO camouflage employed on West German vehicles, using a plastic Leopard 2 and the Vallejo range of paints to do so. Before I started painting, I first of all began to apply a primer so that the later layers of paint adhered to the miniature's surface. For this step, I chose to use a black primer, as this would create the appearance of shadows in some of those harder to reach areas, like those around the tank tracks and between the armour panels. With the tank primed, I could now begin to apply the base colour for the camouflage scheme, and for this, we'll be using some refractive green, and we'll be applying this with a dry brushing technique. Dry brushing requires taking a large and preferably rounded brush, like this one I used here, dipping it into your paint and then wiping the brush onto a piece of tissue or paper towel. This will remove any excess paint and will help to work the paint through the bristles. With the brush prepped, I then applied a series of quick strokes to the surface of the model. By only applying a light amount of pressure here, the paint accumulates onto the large flat surfaces, but not into the recessed areas. Because of the primer, these areas remain black and so appear as shadows, which helps to bring out the level of detail without the need for washes. With the base colour of the refractive green achieved, I had a good starting point for applying the rest of the camouflage pattern. But before I did so, I first wanted to add some definition to the raised details and hard edges of the Leopard. This was done with a mixture of the original refractive green and a roughly an equal amount of stone grey. This lighter green colour was then dry brushed over all of the hard edged details of the tank. This lighter mixture built up along the edges, which helped to build up some contrast against the refractive green surfaces and the near black recessed areas, which really helped those details to stand out. Now that we have a base colour and some detailing, I could begin to apply the first part of the camouflage pattern. To achieve the black banding, instead of using a regular paint, I instead used some black wash to apply the camouflage. Now, using a wash might seem like an odd choice here, but it has two distinct advantages. First of all, it's very fast. The more fluid nature of washes means you can cover a large area very quickly, and you can achieve those curved edges much more easily due to the smooth flow of the wash. Additionally, the wash is semi-translucent. The refractive green base coat is dark enough to allow us to achieve a dark colour by still being able to see the dry brushed highlights applied in the previous step. We removed the need for an additional highlight. The final step in completing the camouflage pattern was to use some of the paint Saddle Brown to apply some brown patches, adjacent to those black stripes. Instead of using a wash for this step, I used a regular paint but thinned out with just a little bit of water. This brown paint was applied in rough patches, always adjacent to a black stripe. By mixing just a little bit of water into the mix, I not only made the paint much easier to apply, but also helped with some of that pre-shading to show through as well. Now that I had completed the camouflage pattern, I next focused my base coat onto some of the smaller details. The first of these involved using some German Camo medium brown, thinned out in the same way as the previous Saddle Brown. This was then applied over the metal track links. This brown gave the tracks a dirted and dusty appearance that I would further build upon later on. In addition to this, I also used this paint to tackle some of the wooden tool handles. Across the Leopard were several areas of dark metal and rubber. These included some of the secondary weapons, tools, and the rubber trim of the road wheels and the track pads as well. To these areas, I applied a base coat of black grey, thinning the paint out in the same way as before. This dark grey colour would allow me to benefit from a black wash later on, something that a pure black wouldn't have. Following the base coats, the next task in painting the Leopard was to apply a black wash once again. Washes can be used to help enhance certain details by creating stronger shading in the recesses and therefore boosting contrast. Washes can be applied over the entire model as they will naturally pool into recesses. But this time around, I didn't want to darken down the surface too much, as the dry brushing had already achieved a lot of the shading that I required. So instead, I focused my application of the black wash directly into the deep recesses, as well as around some of the details like the tools, vents, and tracks. Essentially, it was used to help bring out the shading in anywhere that was maybe looking a little too flat. After allowing the wash to dry, I next wanted to add some of the metallic paint, Oily Steel, to the secondary weapons and tools that were painted earlier with black grey. I applied this paint carefully along the edges using a thin brush. This edge highlighting technique helped to complete that dark metallic appearance. In addition to the edge highlight, a dry brush of Oily Steel was also applied over the tank tracks. If you overspill onto the rub areas, don't worry, as these can be cleaned up with some more black grey. Once I'd finished the step, I made sure to thoroughly clean out my brushes and change out my paint water to avoid contamination of metal paint flakes into my other paints. The final step was to add some light dust marks to the tank. This was applied as a dry brush, much like how the refractive green was applied earlier on. I focused this application over the lower parts of the tank surface, the tracks and the road wheels, which resulted in the appearance of dried mud and dust kicked up during transit. You can also lightly dust this over some of the hard edges to help bring out their detail even further. And here we have the completed Leopard painted in a NATO 3-tone camouflage. Now whilst I focus on just one specific vehicle in this video, you could easily apply the same colours and techniques to other West German vehicles too. You can find a full list of all the paints used in the tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. And if you enjoyed this return to a smaller scale, then please do let me know in the comments. And with that, the final thing to say is a massive thank you to my supporters. Currently, my top supporters on Patreon are Jonathan Hurt, Stuart Smith, Berserker, Daniel Dowling, Douglas Wilson, Jake, Jeremy Kaup, Jesse Smith, Casper Strand, Lyconian Primarch, Merrick, Mr. Grimm, and Raphael Beiruthi. So, a big thank you to you guys, and if you also support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or you just use my affiliates links, then your help is highly appreciated. If you would like to help me out too, then you can check out my description for all of the relevant links. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.